Okay, so I'm Kim Adamski, HIV Prevention Specialist at the Hartford Gay and Lesbian Health Collective. We're located at 1841 Broad Street in Hartford, that's in the South End. And we do sexual health visits, STI testing, education, dental, a bunch of different social and educational groups. And I am here today for Trans Day of Visibility with the folks from PeerPride. Can each of you introduce yourselves and then somebody introduce the organization? I guess fight for it or something.
I can start. Hi, I'm Kitty Steklo. I use he, him pronouns. We have some amazing PeerPride partners here today. I can talk about myself. I'm in New Haven. I'm a trans organizer. I work in suicidology, crisis support, peer support, service development work. So I help people develop different types of mentorship programs, as well as hotlines, warm lines, chat lines, et cetera, that are specifically by and for marginalized communities. And a little bit about PeerPride. We are a all trans majority BIPOC organization that partners with a lot of really cool people, not just in Connecticut, but all over the country. And we do, like I said, equitable and justice oriented peer support programming development. We do equity education work. And in Connecticut here, we also have a really, really special team with a really special project called Trans Haven, which is 100% trans-led resourcing, support groups, advocacy. We have some arts programming. We have some music programs. We do hikes. We do, referrals for assistance with medical stuff. We do medical advocacy in schools, workplaces, etc. We support families. We have a gender creative caregiving and parenting group. We have a lot of different things. We're mostly in the greater New Haven area, but we help out and we kind of cast a pretty wide net where we have a lot of trans people from all over Connecticut that are involved. So really excited from the Trans Haven end to be here and to chat about Trans Day of Visibility, the slightly lesser known cousin of Trans Day of Remembrance. And I think a lot of us here on the panel have a lot of feelings about those two things being like the trans holidays, like, hello, we exist, and also please don't kill us. But it's also a great opportunity for us to talk about, the things that are going on for our communities right now and how we can uplift each other better. So that's me. And as our guests today, we have our partners, Layne.gianakos and Carly Webb. And whichever of y'all want to introduce yourselves, please go ahead.
I can go ahead. So my name is Layne.gianakos. My pronouns are he, him, and his. I'm currently a health equity consultant. I've been working in and adjacent to public health for about 6 years. I've worked in LGBTQ healthcare organizations, particularly ones that focus on gender affirming care, and currently provide LGBTQ competency trainings for organizations that want to provide better care for LGBTQ individuals. Happy to be here.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Carly Webb. My pronouns are she, her. I'm an activist and a journalist. I've been a freelance journalist for nearly 30 years. I am currently a contributor to outsports.com, where my specialty there has been around issues surrounding LGBTQ representation in sports, and more recently, the issues regarding trans inclusion in sports and in school and in life, and the intersections of all three. I'm also an organizer for trans rights, workers' rights, and anti-imperialism with the Party for Socialism and Liberation here in Connecticut. And it's great to see all of you, and it's always great to work with Layne, and it's always great to be around my comrade Kitty.
Thank you so much. And we are definitely going to get to the quote unquote debate. I know that's not the right word on trans folks in sports, but and definitely want to hear from you on that. But first, what is Trans Day of Visibility? Why is it important? And I know that Layne talked about having complicated feelings on those two, on that and Trans Day of Remembrance. So I want to hear more about that as well. So whoever wants to chat.
Yeah, I mean, I can go. So the question, just to recap, was like, what is TDOV and like, what are feelings around it?
Yeah, and also why it's important to have, and then
Yeah.
also your feelings about it.
Yeah. I mean, so Trans Day of Visibility is internationally celebrated as a day to be aware of the existence of trans, non-binary, gender non-conforming people. And it's been around for a little bit less, actually significantly less time than TDOR in terms of being a recognized day. But it's a really, really spectacular day because for a while we only had Trans Day of Remembrance, which is a day of mourning and grief for our community. And Trans Day of Visibility is kind of an alternative to that, where we can talk about the experiences of our communities. We can talk about positive examples of visibility of our community. We can advocate for ourselves. It's also a great day for people who are not trans to make it very clear that they stand with trans people. And especially at a time like right now, where trans rights are very visibly under attack and trans people's lives and bodies and livelihoods and healthcare is being very publicly, very visibly scrutinized. This is a really, really important day for people who stand with trans individuals to, publicly stand up against a lot of these things. So right now, I think the importance of a day like this very much has to do with public, visible political advocacy for trans individuals. And what Trans Day Visibility has always been for me also is an opportunity for us to recenter our own community and for us to hold space for each other just as trans people, and not only define our visibility based on us being visible to a cis sexist society, but also us being visible to each other and us being able to support each other.
And it should also be a Trans Day of Resistance. And that's what visibility means to me. At one level, it means, as Kidil said, coming together within ourselves. And I think that's something we all need to do within ourselves, is come together and give each other our love and our props and our affection while we're here, especially in these difficult times since this pandemic. There's been so much isolation and so much fear, and for some of us, so much tears. I've lost 3 people I was close to during this pandemic. Trans people who took their lives because of the isolation.
Yeah,
And
no, absolutely.
Times like Trans Day of Visibility are times for us to come together. And yes, don't get me wrong, for allies, it's important that you be there. But it also but in many ways, this also, for this day to me, is about family. And not just the family that we see, but the family that we may not see. Because there's a lot of family out there who, for whatever reason, are staying in the bunker. They're staying in the silo, and they're afraid to come out. And if you're not ready, you're not ready. But just know that when you are ready, your family's here with arms outstretched for you. And yes, I did change into the jersey because we're talking about an important struggle here. So no, I had to get my colors in here.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah.
All right.
For Trans Day of Visibility, I just think I remember a time before Trans Day of Visibility existed, and we just had Trans Day of Remembrance. And something that I really enjoy about Trans Day of Visibility is it takes us away from what I call the trans body politics of death, which is where people talk about us when they're talking about our whether we're dying or our statistics around death, rather than centering us when we're alive and our experiences when we're currently alive. So I really like TDOV as a response to TDOR personally.
Yeah, no, that I totally agree with that. That's a really important counterpart to it. So where did you said that Trans Day of Visibility came about much later than Trans Day of Remembrance as like kind of a response. Do you know anything about the history of it like coming about?
Yeah, does anyone want to take it? I can answer, otherwise, whatever works. No, Carly's a big history buff. or Layne also knows. Oh, okay, I can go. Yeah, so TDOV, I think it was founded in 2009. And it was, the premise of it was like pride and LGBTQ general focused things don't really center or uplift trans experiences in a particular way. You know, trans experiences tend to be overshadowed by, you know, cis queer experiences. And also Trans Day of Remembrance exists, but that is a day of mourning. So it started being acknowledged as another day when people can, you know, people can really come together and publicly proclaim that trans people are visible and that trans people should be advocated for, and also trans people can tell other trans people that we're here for each other. So TSER, which is the Trans Student Educational Resources, is a great resource. They do a lot of awesome TDOV spearheading. And their website is fantastic if anybody wants to check it out. It's a great place to learn. It's a great place to get resources.
I love them. I use their gender unicorn all the time.
Yeah, so yeah, they produce a lot of interesting things. And yeah, I mean, that's kind of all I got. I don't know if anybody else has to add to it, but it's definitely, you know, it's definitely used and recognized differently in different places.
Well, and what's great about it is when it first started, it was very central to America, and now it's very much an international holiday. That being said, in the United States, 2021, it was officially recognized as a holiday, which I didn't think I would see anytime soon. So that was something uplifting.
Yeah, I'm sure that felt great. That is really good.
Yeah.
So while we're on the topic of the US though, and politics, there's a few things that are very, I mean, there's a lot of things going on, we know, but there's a few things that are very prominently going on. The whole talking about whether trans women should compete in sports, the Don't Say Gay laws that are being discussed or I think signed, and the issues in Texas with trans youth being able to access the kind of gender confirming services that they need. So who wants to talk about what first? I'm sorry that I'm just like throwing this out and being like, who wants to bite?
Harley?
Well, which one do you want to talk about first? First off, before we even go there, before you go there, let's make sure that people understand the length and the depth of the issue. As we're speaking right now, anti-trans legislation has either been passed or proposed in 39 states in the union. That's 39 of 50. Let that sink in. We're at a point where a good deal of this country, from Key West, Florida, to the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, across to perhaps Montana, down to Arizona, is what I call no trans land. Oh yeah, I forgot, from Arizona back to Ron DeSantis' Florida. Yes, that Ron DeSantis. Now, quick note about Mr. DeSantis. This man signed an anti-trans bill into law on the first day of Pride last year. Talk about flipping the bird to the LGBTQ community in this country. That's the length and depth of the problem. Now, the bill that we should look at first and foremost, first let's look at Tennessee. 5 pieces of anti-trans legislation passed in the last year. 2 are undergoing a court challenge. They called it the slate of hate. Let's take a look at Texas, the second largest state in the union. This is a state that not only passed a bill which legalized discrimination towards transgender youth in their school in regards to the sports issue, but they also at one point were prepared to use their Department of Family Services as sort of a secret police to go after affirming parents. Let that sink in. Just a note to Greg Abbott. transgender people didn't crash your power grid this winter. Also, Florida, the don't say gay law, even though that's kind of the don't say gay law in many ways is a don't say trans law. That's what it is. They're saying that teachers can't talk about LGBTQ anything. That's the part that they get on the news for K through 3. What they don't tell you is you can't even teach LGBTQ history beyond K through 3. That's the part of the bill that they don't tell you about. So de facto, they make sure that they ban any mention of LGBTQ people anywhere in 12 years of public schooling in Florida. Now, I'm going to get why that word public schooling is important in a minute. Oh, by the way, Ron DeSantis, just so you know, though, the Don't Say Gay bill, George Takei already taught us a hack for that. I have a feeling a lot of teachers are just going to start saying Takei. What are you going to do next? Don't Say Star Trek bill? How far are you willing to go? And then there's the student athlete bills, which have been passed currently in 14 states now. 4 states, they're subject to a court challenge. Like I tell all these people time and time again, if you don't know who Chase Strangio is, pass one of those bills, you're going to meet him. And he bats 1,000 in court, and he's batted 1,000 since these bills started getting passed 2 years ago. The main thrust of all of these bills, in a sense, is to legislate transgender people out of public life, whether it's denying young people affirming care, whether it's denying affirming parents to be just that, affirming parents, or the student athlete bills, which to me really quantify a lot of dominoes here by simply stating that you can't participate in interscholastic athletics under the gender in which you identify, which is a de facto ban on trans students as a whole. This is mostly targeted towards transgender girls. Now one quick point. Don't say trans athletes when you really mean trans girls and trans women. Let's quit dehumanizing our people here. Let's say what we mean and mean what we say. But the idea behind these bills is, in a sense, a domino effect. First, keep these kids out of our sports. And in 5 such states, they're banning all trans kids, whether they're boys or girls. And then it makes it much easier to say, keep them out of the locker room. Then you keep them out of the bathroom. And you know what that means? You keep them out of school. Or on the other side, what a lot of these bills are doing, for example, one Republican congressional hopeful in Texas said the quiet part aloud. This is why, if we wouldn't have problems with transgenderism in schools, she said, if we have vouchers in schools. See, that's the other part. For those of you who out there who may be cisgender parenting and think it's not your fight, you know what they're trying to do? They're trying to kill public education when you're not looking. And they're trying to use the corpses of trans people to do it. These are all interconnected issues. If there's one thing that both my friends Layne and Kadil talk about in their work often, is make the connections, make the intersectional connections. And here they are. So if you think it's not your fight to think again, all these fights are connected. But the main thing about all of them is, if you can target the most vulnerable, then you can target the next group up. And you know what that means? That means once they go after affirming care, there's a bill right now in Mississippi designed to take away the health care of anyone, the affirming health care of anyone over 21. They want to ban transgender care completely. I'm 50 years old. That affects me. And then the next thing you know what happens. And again, I'm not saying anything about these people they're not saying about themselves. Read the position papers of the ADF, read the position papers of the Family Resource Council, read the position papers of Focus of the Family, all these right-wing hit squad groups that are funding and feeding the politicians that are pushing this nonsense. If you read their position papers, they said, we want to separate the LGB from the T. So all you cisgender LGB folks, don't think you can separate us, because the fact of the matter is, they've said it. Once we separate the T, guess what we're going to do? Marriage equality, gone. Gays in the military, gone. Employment rights that were hard won in the Supreme Court last year, gone. They're already going after reproductive rights. And I think that's something a lot of people care about. And I care about them too. Danny Turf's listening in the audience. Yes, I care. You know why? Because that's an issue of bodily autonomy. That affects me. And if you take it all the way back, there's some people say, let's take it all the way back to Price Waterhouse. Now, if you're a woman that goes to work, that really affects you, because that tells a company that they'll have the right to fire you if you don't look feminine enough for us. They want a Leave It to Beaver 1950s Take America Back trip. And this is the way they want to get it. Do not be fooled. Don't fall for the okie doke because they're trying to run it. That's the real sum of what these bills represent. This is not about sports to the people that are pushing the hysteria. Leah Thomas was not about sports to the people that are making her the boogeyman. Let that sink in.
Yes. You mentioned, this segues really like solidly into healthcare. And there's so much overlap, right? You were mentioning bodily autonomy, and I'll talk about that stuff later with mental health if y'all want. But this is making me think a lot about like the impact, right, on just the general state of vulnerability that the community is experiencing right now, and like hyper visibility, especially around trans youth accessing healthcare. Layne, is there impacts that you've observed yourself with people that you've supported in Connecticut with the development of bills like this elsewhere? Like, is there concern? Is there any stuff that you want to share in general about like your observations with the anti-trans healthcare bills that have been going on?
Yeah, it's definitely a concern in the state of Connecticut. Anytime we see legislation like this proposed, it affects trans people and it affects trans youth in a devastating way. We know that suicidal rates for trans youth are already ridiculously high. For trans masculine adolescents, their suicide attempt rate is 53%. That's not trans people who have thought about suicide, that's trans people who have attempted suicide. That's more than half of trans masculine adolescents. And prior to 2020, there was no such legislation like this that existed. It started with Arkansas in 2021, and now there are 22 states that have introduced legislation trying to ban medical care for transgender youth. So there is a wave that's occurring because of this hypervisibility that you mentioned. It's a double-edged sword. While we're talking more about trans people and trans issues, it's making other people aware of us, and then they weaponize things against us, like the healthcare system. In Texas, they're weaponizing the DCF against transgender children and transgender parents. Yeah, it's devastating. I always think of one statistic that 28% of trans people said that they did not go to the doctor when they actually needed medical care due to fear of harassment. And 28% is the same amount that were subjected to harassment in medical settings. So it's not these unfounded fears, they're very much rooted in reality. The numbers are the same. Yeah. So there's been a problem with trans healthcare for a long time, and now we're seeing another beast entirely regarding trans healthcare, specifically for trans youth. And I don't think it stops there, as Carly said. They come for youth first because that's the most vulnerable population. I can't think of a more vulnerable population in the LGBTQ community than trans youth for the most part. That's a nice cat.
What a kitty.
Kirby says trans rights.
Yay, good cat.
Exactly. But, and we see that when trans youth are supported and protected, those rates of suicidality go down. There was a 52% decrease in suicidal thoughts for trans kids whose parents supported them. That's just parental support. So imagine if they had support in their school. Imagine if they had support elsewhere in the healthcare setting. Who's to say how much better things could be? But here we are.
Yeah, I really think an important thing that was brought up is that it's that basically trans issues are being weaponized as a way to obscure the real issue, which is oppressing as many people as possible. And that it makes it very easy to ignore that for people who aren't paying as close attention. It affects everyone.
Kim, I want to make a point on that, what Layne and what you are also talking about. If you wear my skin tone, add a couple multipliers to those statistics that you're hearing.
Oh, yeah.
Because that is also the other part of it as well. Not only is this is being weaponized, not only in the societal sense and medical sense, it's also in the racial sense as well. And an example of this is what the former Secretary of Miseducation, a certain Miss Betsy DeVos, tried to do 2 years ago. Betsy DeVos, because the state of Connecticut dare say that we treat cisgender kids and transgender kids the same, mind you. If you remember the Alliance Defending Freedom's lawsuit. And remember, if anyone uses the term freedom or family in the name of their organization, and they're majority white people, right-wing white people, they don't care about your freedom nor your family. You remember that. But
So messed up that it's
when
true.
when they went after Connecticut's federal funding for education, the first targets were impact aid. Now who did they target for that impact aid? They targeted 4 school districts first. All 4 of them have students that are defined as either at risk or special category, i.e., they have certain writers that under our laws of the Justice Department of Education, under those regulations, that impact aid is specifically targeted for reasons. In the case of 2 of those districts that were targeted, New Haven, Waterbury, because they're majority black and brown, they get special designation under law. The third one, I believe, was Bridgeport. Similar reason. Plus, they have a high number of students that are English as a second language. That's where the impact aid goes. The fourth was Groton because of the high numbers of students that are military dependents. They went after the most vulnerable students in our state and said, because we stood up for Andrea Yearwood and Terry Miller, we're going to go after your impact aid that threatened thousands of Connecticut school children. Understand how far these people are willing to go to target, especially trans youth. You think it's just about trans kids? No, they'll target your kid. Connect the dots. That's what we're seeing.
Thank you
It's
so much
your
for
fight
pointing that
too.
out. Yeah. So I do want to get to some actionable items so that folks who are watching can learn some stuff that they can do to help, like, help promote trans visibility, advocate for and uplift trans voices. So if our guests from PeerPride have suggestions, please absolutely do share them.
Yeah, I can start and then other folks can talk. And also I think like if we have time, it'd be really great to hear if there's any questions that people have, so we can have more of a dialogue.
Yeah, for sure.
Because we can always guess what people want to hear about, but it's better to know what people want to hear about. So when it comes to supporting trans people, not just on Trans Day of Visibility, but in general, a lot of the time we look at what feels kind of most safe and easiest. Like, right, when I see cis people like proclaiming their support for trans people, a lot of the time I see people like being like, oh, what's the easiest, safest, and least, obstructive or whatever the word is way for us to say like, oh yes, I have trans friends and I support them. I think that's something that can be really helpful, especially at a time when trans people are actively under attack and when we're being dragged into the spotlight in a way that's really harmful. Is I would really ask for people to challenge themselves to look at ways that they can advance the meeting of the needs for trans people in ways that are less comfortable. So for example, like, what does your workplace look like? Do you hold power in your workplace? Do you hold any kind of ability to impact your workplace? If you have children who go to school, what does that school look like? What do their policies look like? Ask those questions, right? If you have trans friends or family who have people around them who are not supportive, and you are somebody that those unsupportive people listen to, use that connection that you have, right? I think one of the most important things that we can do is, and that we as trans people ask cis people to do, right, is analyze where we stand, who we're connected to, what kind of spaces do we occupy, and what kind of voice do we have in those spaces, and what are the practical material ways in which those spaces treat trans people. So a lot of the time, for example, we hear, I saw somewhere on Instagram today, like it was like some nonprofit was like, oh, actually it was a lot of different nonprofits. that said this. Today is a perfect day to, put your pronouns in your signature in your email. Like, okay, yes, that's a really great thing to do because it normalizes sharing pronouns. But also, what is your policy in your workplace like? Are you dead naming trans people? Are you like outing trans people based on your HR paperwork? Does your health insurance in your workplace cover gender affirming care? What are the practical living conditions for trans people in the space that you're trying to make safer for trans people? Because that is what those material experiences, as well as those social and cultural experiences, together are what drive our resilience and also our risks, right? It's very easy to buy, I stand with trans kids shirt, like, and please do that, like, please put that out there. But also there are many practical ways in which you can actually stand with trans kids and support them in real time, even in a quote unquote progressive state like Connecticut, because here we have a lot of invisible problems that trans people face all the time. And I hear reports every single day, from trans youth, we're going to talk about trans youth, that they're being abused and mistreated in Connecticut schools. And Connecticut's, de facto response is always, well, we're a progressive state. We have non-discrimination clauses. That doesn't happen here. We'll look into it. This is an isolated incident. And that's a lot of the culture that we have to come up against. So as people in the state, I think it's very important to look at it from that lens and understand really how much is going on. And I know Layne, Carly, what do y'all think?
I think using your strengths, whatever they are, because there are so many needs that trans populations have. If you are savvy with health insurance, help trans people enroll in health insurance. We know that 31% of trans people lack regular access to care. A lot of the time that's because of cost barriers. That's because of a lack of health insurance. That's having a lack of transportation. Even being able to bring a trans person to their doctor's appointment can make a huge difference. So just looking at what you're able to do, not everybody can donate, not everybody can donate their time, but they can make things visible. They can have discussions, they can respond to bias in their own workplaces. Really just leaning into where people have their own strengths because the needs are so great.
Carly, you're muted.
All right, no, for me, I put something in the chat that's number one. Stop, especially for people here in Connecticut, stop being smug. Seriously, stop being smug. Don't get the idea that just because Connecticut is a blue state, that's a state that's safe. This is what trans people are still dealing with in this state. And this is something that my good friend and comrade Elliot Olson can talk about because Elliot's been working on this problem. 40% of LGBTQ youth in our state are living on the street right now. Let that sink in. Right now, thanks to the pandemic and the fact that now housing and rent moratoriums have been lifted, a lot more trans people on the street right now. To quote my friend Elliot again, couch surfing is not a solution to the homelessness problem and the houselessness problem. It's not. Also, remember where you're hearing all this stuff right now about trans people playing sports. You probably heard a lot about a certain swimmer at the University of Pennsylvania who people got on planes to fly down to the NCAA championship just to boo her, just to harass her, just to demean her. By the way, a lot of those people got a lot of funding from certain people in the United States to do that. Don't be smug. Where did that all start? Connecticut. The first lawsuit that was placed against transgender kids who just want to play high school sports was right here. Remember, your state Republican Party, yes, I'm naming names. Your state Republican Party here in Connecticut tried to pick on 2 Black transgender high school kids to raise campaign cash. That started here. That wasn't in Georgia. That wasn't in Texas. That wasn't in Florida. That was right here. Don't be smug, Connecticut. Secondly, understand what you're reading, understand what you're watching, look at it with the critical eye and study it. And ask yourself, why is 60 Minutes say they're talking about trans healthcare, but give me 2 minutes on trans healthcare and 12 minutes on detransitioners, and 12 minutes on detransitioners and people who have known links to people that are to groups that are anti-trans. Let that sink in. Look at it with a critical eye. When Channel 8, Channel 30, Channel 61 are doing stories on trans people, really take a good look at it. Where are they coming from? What's the angles here? Look at the things that are being presented to you in the Register and the Current. Look at them with a critical eye. And I also encourage you, these groups I've named tonight, Alliance Defending Freedom, Family Resource Council, Focus on the Family, all these groups, go to their websites and read their position papers. There's nothing I'm not saying about them that they don't say about themselves. They hide in plain sight. They give you the playbook. And also, just to note, certain people, there's a lot of books out there about trans people that are written by people that don't like trans people. Abigail Schreier, for example, understand this one critical thing, and I'm telling you this as a journalist and as a media professional. Abigail Schreier knows she's lying, but the thing is, you don't know she's lying, and she's banking on that. And when you gain media literacy into what's being presented to you, and you look at it with a critical eye, you can separate the truth from the hysteria. And that's the biggest part of all the reporting you're seeing about this. It's hysteria. They want you afraid of trans people because they want you so worried. They want you to say that trans people is this Godzilla that's going to rise out of the Connecticut River and eat all your quote unquote traditional values. Will they take away health care? Will they take away your workers' rights? And will they take away public education when you're not even looking?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's your
Yeah.
fight too.
Absolutely. So I just want to leave a little bit of time for questions for folks. If you do have questions, please drop them in the chat so that we can answer them nice and efficiently. And while we are waiting for your many questions to pour in, would if anybody's willing to provide contact info so that they can answer any questions, continue this discussion, either social media, email, what have you, drop that in the chat as well. PeerPride.com. Well, there you go.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think
That's the website for their organization for anybody who forgot.
Yeah, I think that's something that that I didn't mention in my weird rambling, and people can ask questions if they have. A lot of people have like very, very small practical questions like, how do I support trans people socially, and how do I do better, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that like if there's one thing that you want to take away, it's we shouldn't need a trans day of visibility. We should just understand that people know who they are better than anybody else does. And that applies to everybody, right? Mm-hmm. So when we're encountering people, when you're interacting with people, you don't know what their gender is. You don't know what you should be referring to them as. You don't know how you should be treating them until they tell you. And I think that if we move through life with that perspective and that level of respect and that level of deference to everybody on what they need and who they are, it'll be a lot easier for trans people to exist. That's definitely been my experience. And if you have trans loved ones, or if you have trans friends, or if you have trans coworkers or community members or anything like that, it can be, it can be very tempting to say like, oh, this is difficult. This is an adjustment. This is something that like I'm having a hard time with. We don't need to hear that. Like nobody needs to hear that. You're telling somebody that them being honest with you is difficult for you. And also it's so hard for you to see somebody for who they are. And that's an insult. It might be true for you. It might be something that you need to process for yourself, but you need to do that work of seeing them for like who they actually are instead of convincing them that it's hard for you. So I think when we're talking about hypervisibility, when we're talking about the things that exhaust us and wear down our mental health, a lot of it is people reminding us how inconvenient we are and how little we fit in and how difficult it is for people to get used to us and to accommodate us. And the reality is you just need to defer to people on what they are and really make a shift in how you view gender and what you assume different genders to look like. But that's my little bit on that. So we have a questions form is very informative. I have a teen trans family member needing support and mentoring. Do we have a resource? Yes, we do. Feel free to reach out. So the website that we dropped, PeerPride.com, there's a contact form. And Elliot, if you want to make a connection privately also with Michael's iPad, you are welcome to do that, because I think Elliot would be reaching out to you since he's doing a lot of our like youth and family work. But yes, we do have that.
And just so you all know, when I post this to Health Collective social media and everything, I will include all these resources and contact information as needed in our description/video. So don't worry, when it disappears from your screen, you'll be able to see it again. Well, thank you so much, everyone from PeerPride, for all of the really helpful, informative information that you gave us. You made, I mean, I learned a lot, and everything is so well said. And I appreciate the time that you spent with us. Just so our audience knows, some of the folks from PeerPride will be back with us in a couple of weeks in a session also on Zoom about gender creative caregiving, which is kind of based on their gender creative caregiving group that they have. So definitely keep an eye on our social media for that. I think that I'm going to be posting about that starting tomorrow. And yeah, anybody else have any closing thoughts?
Great job. Very, very informative. Thank you so much, all of you.
Thanks
for
everyone
being
for
here.
coming.
Thank you.
Definitely
for
check out our
coming.
Facebook.
Yeah, go for it.
We have some events. If anybody's
I will.
interested, we have events coming up that are specifically by and for trans people. But anybody who is a parent, especially of very young kids, we actually have our GCC, some of our GCC group leaders here tonight. Hi, Terry and Jordan. We love you. We do have a group, or one group right now for Trans Haven that does have cis people in it. Is a group for parents of babies, infants, expecting parents and caregivers, people who work with very, very young children around like supporting kids in determining their own identity. So that's the support space for that, if that applies to you.
So thank you very much.
I dropped in the chat the name of a pretty thick pamphlet that PFLAG put out. It's called Our Trans Loved Ones, and it's available in English and Spanish. It's a great primer just to begin with. For any family members or loved ones of trans individuals. Is great for parents, etc. It's great that you're asking the questions, and it can definitely be hard to explain that stuff to people. So that's a great place to start. Also, TSER has some decent resources, like we said earlier, but I would start with Our Trans Loved Ones for sure, and definitely get in touch with us. I'm sure Elliot would be happy to talk to you.
Perfect.
Oh, we have a hand.
Thank you.
Elliot, do you have a hand?
I do have a hand. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to crash.
Feel free. We were hoping you'd crash a lot. When I was talking about housing, I was hoping you'd crash. People need to hear the breakdown of what you've been talking about. Because I think I learned about it. You telling me.
One thing I do want to say, especially in supporting youth, I think that there's a big gap that a lot of people in the trans community don't quite understand, and that there's support, right, specifically for your loved ones, for your kids, for your family members, for your friends, whoever, but there are also direct support places, right, for family members, for parents, because they're going through their own thing that is very real, and maybe should, a lot of the time it's not best played out with the kid, that is currently trying to find their way. And so, right, when you're thinking about support services, when you're thinking about any kind of direct services to get in on, basically, I think it's crucial that a lot of people think of, not only what is, what are the things I can get for my loved one because I want to support them, but what are the support structures that I can prop up for myself as well, or I can give, to my loved ones who need them, because this isn't a one person thing. This is something that is affecting everybody, and everybody in turn should be accessing as much care as they can because of that. I'm not sure if that made sense, but I have your email, Michael's iPad, and reach out through the site, or I will just email you as well if I don't see anything come through in the next couple days.
That's great. I would appreciate that.
We
Because
also have,
I really need to follow through.
we
Sorry.
also have a video from a few weeks ago with Sarah Gilbert, LCSW, who works with friends and family of trans folks, and her video with us was on trans allyship and supporting your trans friends and family. So that's on our YouTube and Facebook pages, and might be a good thing to check out as well.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. Well, our time is coming to a close. So this has been, again, a really awesome discussion. And you can always give me a call at 860-278-4163, extension 111, or kima@hglhc.org. All right. Have a great night, everybody.
Thanks all.
Thank you. Thank you so much for
Bye.
having
Good
us.
night, everyone.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Better
Bye.
A better world is possible.
Yes,
Yeah, Carly.
yes.
Thank you.
Let's make it
It
happen.
is.
Yes, let's do it.